All right, bettheboardpodcast.com is where you find him all the time. bettheboardpodcast.com. He is Todd Fuhrman, and he is also on social media at Todd Fuhrman. And right now he's on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. What is up, Fuhrman? How are you today?
I am doing well, gentlemen. And one thing before we start breaking down this week's slate, normally losses don't linger when you're in this racket as long as I've been doing it, and I'm sure LT can say the same. Watching that Army-North Texas game unfold for listeners last week was arguably one of the more painful things to see transpire with Chandler Morris's poor decision-making in the red zone. So hoping for a little bit more late-game variance to smile upon us this week.
Yeah, and for me that number was interesting because I gave it out on Friday night on my side, and I had to give it out at 3.5 because of the unknown with Bryson Daly, and then he plays it goes all the way back up to 6, and there were so many opportunities for North Texas to cover the 6, not necessarily to win the game like you and I thought if Dwayne Coleman would have been playing in that game, but that was one of the more frustrating perfect under if you play the under there, because North Texas, as you said, could do nothing in the red zone.
Yeah, and full disclosure here, guys, when we broke that game down, I was working under the information that had come across my desk that Daly wasn't going to go. And even when he did go, you tell me Army scores 14 points in that game, and we're taking a number 3.5 or better there with an underdog in a game where the total is in the mid-60s. That's the kind of scenario that's going to win more often than not. And it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately, when you go to the red zone 3 times, come away with 0 points in those trips with 2 picks and a touchdown that was overturned that I still can't quite figure out why it was the case.
Texas-Arkansas gets us going on a Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Central on ABC. And on paper, this looks Texas all day long. Arkansas had their moment against Tennessee. But there's something bred into the DNA in Arkansas that they hate Texas so much back to the Southwest Conference days. The last time Texas was in Fayetteville, they got their butts kicked. What do you make of this game? There seems to be a changing points spread line out there on this game.
You know, first time, Dunaway, these programs will play as members of the same conference since 1991 after they played 60 straight seasons from 1932 to 1991, and I'm sure that was before the time of a lot of the listeners that are tuning in, listening to us each week. Texas is a team, for me, that has done what's been asked of them, but you dig into Texas's resume and you look at some of the opposing offenses that they've faced. The schedule leaves a lot to be desired from an SEC standpoint. Non-conference-wise, they weren't really pushed, and the one time they had to kind of step up in class, we saw Georgia stymie them on the defensive side. In this game, I do think Texas gets what they want offensively. We saw Arkansas secondary a few weeks ago give up 3 60-plus yard touchdown passes to Ole Miss, and Texas can operate through the air with a similar ruthless efficiency. But on the flip side, Arkansas having multiple weeks to prepare, a healthier, at least what we think will be a healthier Taylon Green and Jaquindon Jackson, gives them the kind of key cogs to keep this game competitive. The problem is we sit here on a Friday and try and advocate for a live underdog. You know, this number originally opened north of 2 touchdowns like you alluded to, and you're kind of in no man's land at 11.5. The only way that I would tell people if they still wanted to get a piece of Arkansas in this game would be to shop around and see if they're able to get the Hogs +7 in the first half, hoping that Bobby Petrino and company have schemed something up, and you're going to see Arkansas's best offensive plays scripted early in this contest.
Todd Fuhrman is with us, bettheboardpodcast.com. That's bettheboardpodcast.com. At Todd Fuhrman on social media. He's on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. Speaking of quarterback health, what is the Vegas opinion on Nico at Tennessee? Still listed as questionable, but now Tennessee is at least saying it is concussion protocol type stuff.
So multiple friends of your fine program who shall remain nameless with ties to Tennessee have assured me throughout the course of the week that Nico would indeed be under center for this game, given everything that's at stake for Tennessee. Now, I'm not necessarily sure for the Vols that's a good thing, given what we've seen from Nico as far as being an erratic passer for long stretches this season. But the Vols are dinged up at other spots as well, and I think those injuries are the ones that are flying under the radar a little bit. You know, Dante Thornton has dealt with injuries throughout the course of the season. You know, Dylan Sampson has started to have some fumbling issues, putting the ball on the carpet once in each of the last 3 games, and he got rolled up on pretty good last week against Mississippi State. Did finish the game, but looked to lack some of that burst. For Tennessee to be successful here, it's got to boil down to that defensive line and being as disruptive as what we saw from Ole Miss against this Georgia offensive line. If Tennessee can't get stops and force Carson Beck into known passing situations, even with the healthy Nico, I'm just not sure Tennessee can move the football consistently enough. And guys, we've seen very similar point spreads in this rivalry each of the last 2 years. I mean, it was last season people advocating for Tennessee. Georgia goes on the road to Neyland Stadium, wins the game 38-10. And a couple of years ago, it was a similar spot. Georgia laying 9.5. They end up winning the game in workmanlike fashion, 27-13. So this is a little bit of buyer beware. It will be one of the most public underdogs that we'll see of the weekend because the public remembers what they saw last. And I would have advocated for going under the total if we did this hit on Wednesday, but now as we're at 46.5, 47, I think a lot of the value has been zapped there. I do think points at a premium, though, for two offenses really struggling to string together consistent drives.
Furman, South Carolina's turned into a money tree, and I didn't know what they were going to do with this number because Missouri is ranked still. Missouri is 4-0 in these one-possession games, and Eli Drinkwitz, we laughed about this a little bit ago, still believes that they're in the college football playoff hunt. But South Carolina, their last three SEC wins by a combined or an average of 36-12, they've completely dominated. I am surprised the number is this high. It wouldn't surprise me if South Carolina wins the game by 21 plus, but it is a robust number against a ranked team.
And I think Eli still actually believes that he may have Brady Cook out there, despite what the betting market is telling us right about now. And that's part of the reason that you're looking at the Gamecocks such a heavy favorite in this particular spot. Number did open as low as 12 earlier in the week with the total substantially higher as well in that 44.5, 45 range. What we've seen in the last 24 to 36 hours is those numbers moving in harmony with each other, suggesting that South Carolina is going to have to encounter the Drew Pine experience. Don't tell that to Oklahoma fans who had to watch Drew Pine march Missouri 80 yards in the waning moments of that game to somehow snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. You mentioned South Carolina and what they've done in recent weeks. If Missouri was healthy here, the Tigers would be a live underdog because Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt, in my opinion, don't provide some of that dynamic passing attack that Missouri could. But with Pine under center, it's South Carolina or pass. The problem is at 2 touchdowns right now, you may get a little bit of a letdown spot for South Carolina, and the total, again, has been beaten up some. So a very real professional money come in on this first half under ticket at 23 when it was widely available yesterday.
Utah, Colorado, 11 o'clock on Fox, and it just feels like Utah to me did everything they possibly could do to win that rivalry game last week. Got to be out of gas. This feels like a Deion Sanders, Colorado boat race here.
And you know what? Unfortunately, Dunaway, as much as I like to disagree with you when you make some of these points, I would echo a lot of those same sentiments here. I think Utah's game of the season was last week under the bright lights. Rice Eccles build a 21-10 lead at the half against BYU, have a chance to knock your most hated rival from the ranks of the unbeaten, and you're done in late in the game with a holding penalty that I actually think was a penalty, unlike Utah's AD. And look, you can't sugarcoat the fact that Utah did not score a single point in the second half of that game. In steps a Colorado team, much more dynamic on the offensive side that should be able to play a little bit of pitch and catch. Utah down one of its top offensive weapons, Brant Keefe, lost for the season, and it feels like Utah will kind of limp this one to the finish line. I'm not running to lay the 11.5 with Colorado, but I would want no part of Utah in this spot. I think there'll be a better chance to fade Colorado in the coming weeks.
Todd Fuhrman is with us, BetTheBoardPodcast.com, BetTheBoardPodcast.com, and you can also follow him on social media at Todd Fuhrman. His Under the Radar pick coming up. LSU, believe it or not, in a bunch of teams with 2 losses and a tie, LSU's got one of the better paths to the SEC championship game, which would then give them 60 minutes for a bye. That said, they're only a 4-point favorite at Florida. What do you see in this game?
Let's hope for the sake of the College Football Playoff Committee that LSU does not go on to win the SEC title. And I know that's not what LSU fans want to hear, but I've seen enough of the Tigers so far this season to know exactly where they should be. And it's a fringe playoff team, not one being included as one of the best 12 in the country. This is an interesting number here with LSU just a short favorite in this spot. We did start to see some Florida money enter yesterday with the news that DJ Lagway will indeed be under center for the Gators. And for LSU, look, you go through the resume and what they've been able to accomplish this season. They've taken care of what I would call inferior foes as short road favorites in the past. The problem for me is that game wasn't just a loss against Alabama. That was you have 2 weeks to prepare to figure out what you did incorrectly to slow down Jalen Milroe as a runner, and now it's back-to-back losses in as many games for LSU. I wouldn't be shocked if it turned into 3 in a row, but I don't know if I'd be running to grab Florida with the points because I do think this is a high variance type game. I might be more inclined to try and take a shot with Florida on the money line, that if they're the right side, they can win this game outright. So to grab them plus $1.70 and hope that Billy Napier has turned this game into one of the most important on the entire schedule, because Florida wins this game, you now have a path to getting bowl eligible with Florida State in the regular season finale, and that, in my opinion, would be a massive win for a Gators team who came into the regular season with their win total set at 5.
Because I brought up South Carolina, I'm going to bring up the ACC version of South Carolina, and that's Louisville. Louisville's a really good team. I've gotten to the point in life where I don't mind laying a big number on the road. Louisville's laying 3 touchdowns, minus 20.5 on the farm. Stanford has lost 6 straight up and 6 straight against the spread. Do you mind laying the big numbers on the road?
It's big, and I think when you look at the Stanford Cardinal and the way they've been priced out, you mentioned it. I mean, they haven't done favors for anybody at the betting window. And typically when these ATS losing streaks get to be this long, teams are extremely undervalued, and I think that's kind of what we have here. For me, if it got to 21, I would probably be forced to bet Stanford more as a value proposition than anything else, knowing that both of these teams coming off the bye, and you go through what Stanford has had to go through in their first foray into the ACC. It's more or less been a murderer's row, and you saw them kind of limp to the end of that stretch. I mean, they started it with Clemson, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, and SMU. Now, loss against Wake Forest and NC State aren't great, but you talk about a team that had played so many games in a row, having a bye way back in week 2 against Cal Poly, that if Stanford has anything, you're going to see it on full display. Not calling for the outright win, but I do think it's a big number for a Louisville team that still has Pittsburgh and Kentucky on deck. I think Louisville wins, but Stanford may show a little bit better than what we've seen in recent weeks.
I don't understand the number. Oregon and Wisconsin, 6:30 on NBC. I know the helmet looks like it's a close game, but this Wisconsin team has been dominated by a couple of elite teams. Their win streak was against average or below average teams, actually bad teams. Oregon seems to be a complete football team. Why is this number so small? Why is it not more Oregon?
And this is a number that's actually shortened a little bit. You could have had Wisconsin as a 14-point underdog earlier, but we've seen Wisconsin take money in a lot of weeks in a row. I mean, they took money as a home underdog against Penn State, came up short in that game. They took money against Iowa and really floundered in that particular spot. So they have been a betting darling from some of the more influential groups that are out there, but they have not rewarded them at the window. I think when you're looking at Oregon's full body of work, this is a team who has their aspirations set, not just on winning the conference, but making a deep run in the college football playoff. And what we've seen from Dan Lanning is he hasn't put his foot to the accelerator to win a lot of these games by margin over the last handful of weeks. 35-0 at Purdue on a Friday night, very workmanlike. Oregon probably could have won that by 50. Illinois, they stopped scoring in the second half. You need to sweat to get that game across the finish, and the same can be said for the last couple of weeks against Michigan and Maryland, where it hasn't been about getting Dylan Gabriel those gaudy stats that would, in my opinion, make him the clear-cut Heisman frontrunner if they've tried to pad those numbers. Camp Randall at night can be a difficult place to play, relatively speaking. I mean, this would be Oregon's third trip since the middle of October across multiple time zones, so you wonder what they have left in the tank. I just can't get to Wisconsin shorter than 2 touchdowns here, because if Oregon wants to make a statement on national TV and let Gabriel throw it around the yard, there's no reason for me to believe that they can't torment Wisconsin's defense, even with the Badgers coming in as the more well-rested side.
All right, before we get Fuhrman's thoughts on tonight's fight, let's get the under-the-radar play for him. The audience is giving you credit, not for a North Texas loss, but for a West Virginia win. Lance brought up the North Texas game. You said that was going to be it, but I'll give you another one. You gave your opinion. So however the audience wants to score it, he's either got 1 loss or 2 losses, but he also gave you a win last week. So.
We can call it 1-1 if we want for
1-1.
official record keeping. I appreciate the audience being very liberal with all that, but should have been 2-0. Let's put it that way.
All right. So where are we going this week for the end of the radar?
So we are going to a place a stone's throw away from you guys, and I can hold someone in the Brown family accountable if it doesn't go the way that I'm going to draw it up. Backing the South Alabama Jaguars plus the 7.5 against the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. When you look at Louisiana this year, they come in white hot, very much in control of their own Sun Belt destiny, but also having the luxury of being able to drop a game. And this time of year, when I'm looking for some of these games that aren't going to be the marquee matchups, I want to find a team that's listed as an underdog that, in my opinion, has a better ground game, and that's exactly what you have with South Alabama in this spot, matching up against the Louisiana Raging Cajuns defense that's outside the top 120 from an EPA per rush standpoint. You look at some of the underlying numbers, they've struggled with the explosive ground game, and I think South Alabama, having multiple weeks to prepare for this game, is going to be able to try and put together a game plan and keep things competitive like they have done in most of these Sun Belt games. Look for Kentrell Bullock and Gio Lopez to have big games on the ground. I'll take South Alabama plus the 7.5 in what we'll call the Brownie special.
I am already heavily invested in South Alabama. Fuhrman is giving you an opportunity to invest in the Jags as well. So there you go. Fuhrman's under the radar.
Full disclosure here, Brownie, I will not have a tuition payment, though, on this game. So the university gets a hell of a lot more money from you every 6 months than it gets from me.
Yeah, thankfully, my daughter got her mom's brains, not mine, so they get less than they get from some.
Well, that's a good thing then. So that's all we look for then. She gets her smarts from the right side of the family.
That's right. That is correct.
And her looks, if anybody needs to say that.
There's zero doubt about that.
I don't know if that needs to be said. I don't want to leave that hanging out there.
No, 100%. She gets all the good stuff from my wife.
Yeah.
Any other games, guys, that you wanted to hit on real quick?
No.
I wasn't sure.
No.
I mean, there are some big games in the NFL this week, and I know we kind of neglect the NFL when we talk to you because there's so much college action going on. Going back to last night, Dan Quinn's decision to go for it on fourth down. I know this has become a trend with him. We all talked about it in the first segment today. We kind of agreed, like, on the road in that situation, keep control of the game, put a little more pressure back on the Eagles. I backed the Commanders. I was completely wrong on that game. Where were you on that?
I am completely of the same mindset that I am all about aggression when it comes to trying to be able to control the game. But given the yips that we've seen from Jake Elliott, I think it takes the field goal out of the equation. So if you're able to kick there and take the lead, Philadelphia has to be a little bit more aggressive than they otherwise would be inclined to do. But I also will say that we're starting to see some concerning things with the Commanders, and while their schedule lightens up a little bit, Cliff Kingsbury, when he was the head coach at Arizona and also during his time at Texas Tech, as you guys know all too well, as the season progressed, he didn't always make the right adjustments and think outside the box. So as there's more and more film, let's see what it looks like for Jaden Daniels and if there are opportunities to bet against the Commanders or maybe look to try and play under their total in some of these games, especially when they get a healthy Marshawn Lattimore back to anchor that secondary.
A very underrated game. Bengals at the Chargers. Chargers white hot as well. Games flying under. Their defense has been completely dominant. And Justin Herbert getting a little bit more of a feel with Harbaugh as the head coach. Jesse Minter, obviously Michigan misses him as well, the defense coordinator now for the Chargers. But Cincinnati holding on to their playoff lives. They're catching 1.5 on the road in SoFi. That's a great under-the-radar game.
Oh, it's going to be a phenomenal watch on Sunday night because I think both of these teams have a lot of questions to answer. We look at the win-loss record for the Chargers, and it suggests everything is going well. But you dig into the opposing offenses that the Chargers have faced, and I have them facing the worst strength of opposing offense schedule in the entire league. Here comes a Bengals team that may have the services of Orlando Brown and T. Higgins back in the mix off of that mini bye. You mentioned Jesse Minter and what he's done. I think the Chargers are doing more with less in terms of personnel on that side of the ball, and they are going to be a real problem for the rest of the league offensively, given how much progression we have seen from Herbert in just a very short period of time. Once they start adding weapons around him, we know that they've built in the trenches the right way along the offensive line, and this is a Chargers team that I'd be looking to buy stock in, maybe not for this season because I think their ceiling is capped, but going forward for sure. But in this game, a strong lean towards the Bengals as a short road underdog. I think they know their season is hanging in the balance, and who could blame the Chargers even if playing in prime time? They didn't have one eye trained on the Hard Bowl that'll take place next Monday night.
All right, before you go, Fuhrman, Jake Paul, Mike Tyson tonight in Dallas. It is currently at mybookie.ag minus 222, excuse me. Jake Paul minus 222, over under 5.5 rounds. What are your thoughts on tonight's fight?
So if you believe in the legitimacy of this fight, which should always come with the important caveat here, the number tells us everything we need to know, that people are going to want to try and back Mike Tyson because they remember Iron Mike in his prime, when he was in pristine physical condition. But into his late 50s, if Iron Mike can't land a knockout punch early, I think the longer the fight goes, Jake Paul ends up getting the edge. And what we're starting to see in the market today, my bookie actually was one of the shorter prices that are out there. Some of the other bigger offshore shops are drifting in that 260, 270 range. I've spoken to a couple of guys in town, and as LT knows, there is one-way traffic on this particular fight. It is going to be all about them rooting for Mr. Paul in the ring tonight. And while I won't quite call it as decided an advantage as Floyd Mayweather against Conor McGregor when we saw that fight unfold, this will be the true separation of the pros versus Joes. So I think you have to try and look towards the favorite instead of taking what appears, at least on the surface, to be an attractive price tag.
Yeah, I'm giving this out tonight, but I mean, I already said it earlier in the week. I think this is Jake Paul, TKO in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. If Tyson gets him, it's got to be in the first round or maybe early 2nd. I agree with you 100%.
Yep, I think that's how it goes. And the longer the fight, takes a shape of its own, that you're going to see Jake Paul continue to grow into it. It's interesting, though, that this is a sanctioned fight, and we're going 2-minute rounds, upwards of 8. The over-under sits at 5.5, and I wouldn't be surprised if it went more than 5.5 to try and keep fans engaged. But again, these things always come with the caveat of how legitimate are they, and sometimes the betting market tips its hand before anybody else knows what's really going to transpire.
All right, bettheboardpodcast.com. That's where you get it all from Fuhrman. Bettheboardpodcast.com and at Todd Fuhrman on social media. Fuhrman, thank you very much, man. Enjoy the weekend.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Best of luck at the window this week.
Thanks, buddy. You too. Fuhrman with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline.